Okay, now we've had this happen, and this is big news. Who will control Republicans in a brand new U.S. Senate, 119th, as it gets underway for Congress in January? Who will be the leader to succeed Mitch McConnell? Forgive me. I want to go to senior congressional correspondent Chad Pergram. Just moments ago, you had a first vote. There were 3 men. Now it's down to 1. We have a leader. Tell us about it.
Yes, we have a new leader in the United States Senate. It is John Thune, the Republican from South Dakota. He won on the second ballot. There were 2 ballots here taken. On the first ballot, this was the breakdown. It was John Thune got 23, John Cornyn from Texas got 15, and Rick Scott got 13. But it's not first past the post. You have to have an outright majority of those casting ballots. There are 53 Republicans voting in this leadership election here, so you had to get 27. Now, I've asked for a vote total here. How many John Thune won by, we don't know. But that second ballot was between Thune and Cornyn, and John Thune has prevailed. It's interesting about John Thune. You know, he came to the Senate in 2004, and he beat another leader in the Senate, Tom Daschle. Tom Daschle had been the minority leader and the majority leader, and it was John Thune, who had served in the House previously, who beat Tom Daschle in 2004. So he will be the person working with President-elect Trump and presumably House Speaker Mike Johnson in the new Congress. And it's always hard to kind of divine these leadership elections here, Harris. You know, I always talk about them being particle politics. It's hard to read them because it's decided at the subatomic political level. I was reminded some years ago, my favorite story about a leadership election was in 1994 between Tom Daschle and Chris Dodd. And there was a senator at the time, Ben Nighthorse Campbell from Colorado, who was a Native American, who switched parties later on. He was a Democrat and became a Republican, but Tom Daschle won by 1 vote. Now, who do you think that Ben Nighthorse Campbell, a Native American, cast his ballot for? A man who represents the Sioux Nation, Tom Daschle, or Chris Dodd, a Connecticut Yankee? That's why you had leader Daschle. So we'll see if this was a tight race like that. But it always comes down to those very particular votes. And it's oftentimes about relationships. It was generally believed that John Thune had the best relationships among Republican senators. And J.D. Vance, he was in that vote today. We don't know how he voted.
So he did vote.
Well, we don't know that definitively.
Okay.
He came in and I asked him, and you know what the funny thing is here, Harris? We might not know how many of these senators voted because it's a secret ballot.
It's a secret
Some will
ballot,
announce it.
of course.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, but I know you and I were talking last hour as the first vote was going on and that breaking news was happening. And the big question at that point, or one of them, was whether or not Senator J.D. Vance, who's still in the Senate, he's vice president-elect now, and when he becomes vice president, he'll be the president of the Senate. So we didn't know if he would vote. We still don't know that. So you cleared that question up, at least for now. We'll wait for the answer. Chad Pergram, great on the Hill today. Thank you. And thanks for the particle politics. I like that. Very
the subatomic level of politics.
I can't say all of that today. I'm kidding. Good to see you. All right. So, Kaylee, you and I were talking right before this began, and I feel like we get like seconds to all talk to each other, right?
Yes.
A lot going on. What Chad just pointed out about relationships for Senator Thune, that comes into play with something like this. You had some thoughts on the differences between these candidates.
This is a big deal. Look, Rick Scott, who lost on the first ballot, I remember him being on Air Force One. He definitely was more of the so-called MAGA choice, maybe more in line with the president-elect Trump. Thune, there was some acrimony between Trump and Thune over the years. The hatchet was buried. Thune went to Mar-a-Lago with his wife, and they made up. And he said, we have an understanding. So Thune had an understanding with Trump. The hatchet has been buried. And what I know is this. Thune is about to walk into a leadership structure that includes Mike Johnson and Trump. He's the third to come on board. Mike Johnson told me they have a well-designed playbook and they are prepared to execute with precision. So what Thune is walking into is something that has been prepared over the last few months by the House Speaker Mike Johnson, who has the support of President Trump, and by President Trump. So he is walking into something that has been prepared.
So I was questioning this as this was coming together, and you hit the nail on the head. I said there is something happening in the House that informs what we're seeing today in the U.S. Senate as they vote for leadership, and you just told us what that would be. Look, it looks like Republicans will take back the House. It does. It does not look like they'll have much wiggle room. So you need somebody to have laid out a plan like Speaker Johnson if he's going to retain that role. And so that conceivably had maybe a part with the relationship that he would have with who won in the Senate.
So a 3-seat majority in the Senate is massive, right? You get to do a lot of things.
Yeah.
A 3-seat majority in the House is like razor thin. Remember, just again in the House, just to go there, you have people who think legislation is too liberal. Some say it's too conservative, and to get all of them on the same page to vote becomes really, really challenging. So again, I think Speaker Johnson has done a really good job of herding the cats in the same direction. But they're all going to have, the House and the Senate are going to have to be on the same page because it is tight majorities. If you want to pass the America First agenda, no one can leave the ship. And it takes strong leaders to do that. And again, John, the Senate is what we do in middle school. It is who is the most popular for a student president.
Oh, I hope it's not like that.
But it goes to, it's human nature. This is relationships, and right, who do you like, and who can help you get your agenda passed, help you pass your bills.
Okay.
And John Thune has done a lot of that. And again, I think Rick Scott is probably the most conservative. But again, that interpersonal relationship truly matters in the institution.
So you were watching this on election night, Sandra. What does that tell us about the makeup of the Senate if a Rick Scott, who we know is more conservative, and would carry that banner, and who had heard recently from the president? I mean, the president-elect did not weigh in today. What does that tell us about who's in the Senate for Republicans?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to point out that Elon Musk did step in while Donald Trump stayed on the sidelines. Musk stepped in on Sunday and said, vote for Rick Scott. So we know where some of his closest allies stood in this race. Thune had been urging him, for obvious reasons all along, to stay on the sidelines. He did, and that obviously benefited Thune. We're seeing what is happening in this moment. Look, I think the most important thing to point out right now is there is some wiggle room in there, but there are huge tasks that are going to come before the Senate. When you look at the promises that were made during this White House campaign, and you look at the changes the American people voted for, you're talking about massive legislation that's going to come before these lawmakers. I mean, you're talking about immigration, you're talking about tax cuts, you are talking about huge, enormous changes that they are going to have to deal with. So the question is Thune the guy? People are probably thinking Rick Scott was probably somebody that would carry out some of Donald Trump's closest plans. Perhaps, Kayla, you're going to weigh in on that. But John Thune's been in there for a while, and he obviously managed his campaign for this quite well.
Well, I'll tell you what he said on the 6th. Thune released a statement, and I think that's really telling that he was excited about this administration. He said, the incoming Senate Republican majority will work hand in hand with the Trump-Vance administration to lower costs for families, secure our southern border, and renew America's energy dominance. And then he goes on to say, the work begins now. And that was the day after the election. So I think coming out and acknowledging perhaps that despite, a difference in opinion in the past, he came out immediately with, I'm here, I'm ready, put me in, and this will be seamless. And I also point to the benefit of President Trump having selected J.D. Vance as his vice president, because this is a senator. So when you talk about the relationships and import of such, and that's what he's there for in part, right? Is that the vice president has those relationships with the Senate. And so if there is any friction, if the wrong guy won, according to some, that's what J.D. Vance is there for, to come and massage those relationships and say, hey guys, let's all work together as a machine. I personally have no doubt that this will be an effective machine.
J.D. Vance is the break. He's the tiebreaker. He's going to do what Kamala Harris was talking about all through the end of her campaign.
Republicans have 53 votes, though, now.
Right.
You don't need the tiebreaker, right?
You don't.
He's got some room.
But there is a difference between a Senator Thune and a Senator Rick Scott, or maybe it doesn't matter.
But I think it does matter. But also, when you want to move your nominees through the Senate, you need approval, right? Who can manage the institution best? And the senators themselves thought it was John Thune. That's where the vote went. And again, you don't want any bumps in the road. Liberals, some of the nominees we're probably going to talk about later, don't like some of Trump's nominees. And it's John Thune's job now to make sure that all Republicans are on board, get them confirmed, and get the agenda.
Emily just brought up energy legislation as well.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk about what a huge part of this administration that is going to be. John Thune from South Dakota might be the guy.
A lot about energy. You're right. Martha McCallum, anchor and executive editor for The Story. We were together last hour as the first vote failed for Senator Rick Scott. Then there were two Johns left, if you will, Cornyn and Thune, and now we know the winner is Senator Thune. Your first thoughts?
So John Thune obviously is very well liked in the Senate. He has had his eye on this spot since McConnell announced that he would not return to the leadership position. He is a longtime senator from South Dakota. But I think that the wind is around reform. This is very clear when you look at what the president-elect has in mind in terms of energy, in terms of the border, in terms of continuing the Trump tax cuts, in terms of immigration issues in this country and energy, as you all were just saying. I do not anticipate that John Thune is going to want to stand in the way of the reform that is seen and envisioned by President Trump. The message that Trump gave to the congressional side in his meeting this morning with Mike Johnson, get to it and unify. He knows the significance of these first 100 days. Last time, in 2016, it took them 80 days of the 100 days to get their nominations through this process. It was long and laborious. They don't want to see that this time. They have a very unique opportunity with 53 senators in the Senate chamber, and I don't see John Thune standing in the way of this agenda.
Well, Martha, I know you're with us for this hour. There's so much going on. So, look, there are two doors that we're watching as all of us sit here, and Martha joins us, too. We're waiting for Senate Republicans to speak. So, you know, coming out that door with microphones, we're waiting for that to happen. Perhaps we might even hear from Senator Thune, who just won leadership of the U.S. Senate. We're also waiting outside the portico at the White House. Team might put up a split screen now. Peter Doocy was in the driveway waiting to see if President-elect Donald Trump might come out and talk about what went on in the meeting with President Biden. So we've got two focal points today, and we will stay on that. Kayleigh, I want to come back to you on something, though, just in terms of the President-elect getting involved or not getting involved. In the beginning, we knew who we wanted, right? Then he got quiet. If you have too many votes, it gets muddied, as Martha just pointed out. Like, you need a crisp decision. Do you think we got what we were looking for today in terms of that, and what does that mean to Trump in your estimation?
Look, I have no doubt that the allies around Trump probably wanted Rick Scott. It was just someone who, in his gut, viscerally supports the agenda. President Trump, however, was very wise not to weigh in on this. The Senate is an interesting institution. They have a degree of independence. They don't necessarily see themselves beholden to a president, even if it's a president within their own party. That's why they have secret ballots. They're very much an institution that has this degree of independence. So I think not weighing in was smart politically. The last thing President Trump would want to do would be endorse someone and then go into Washington if they chose a different way with that kind of political loss in the back. So smart not to weigh in, but also wise for him to have met with Thune back in October. He saw the writing on the wall that he needed an ally. He made alliances with all three and is ready to move forward. But the question for Thune will be this. They all indicated an openness to recess appointments, and it's easy to say that on paper. But when push comes to shove, when Trump says, I want that recess appointment, is he going to do it? He should. Trump has a mandate to lead. We will watch closely.
What do you know about Thune that might be able to answer the question that Kayleigh's asking?
Well, first, I think it's important to note that Donald Trump did meet with all three of them. And in those conversations, he probably thought, you know what, all of them are going to carry out the agenda, so I don't have to get involved. If someone is opposed to the agenda or going to be a problem for the agenda, that's when he'd have to be public and make a statement and try to push senators. And by the way, you're right, they're very independent in the Senate. The problem, though, is when you have a mandate from the American people and you won such a majority with Republicans, and these are Republican senators, it's really hard when you get pressure from the U.S. president who just had that mandate. So it would have been effective, but I think the president thought, why do it? I'm not going to make any enemies here. I'm going to keep them all friends. I don't care who wins because they're all buying into the things that I need in this new administration.
Yeah.
Emily.
Which I think goes back to what you were saying the other day, Kayleigh, which was that the difference between this transition and this next chapter and the prior one is that President-elect Trump can sort of rest assured that everyone is indeed fully in line, fully on his side, and more appropriately, fully recognizes and respects his authority as the duly elected incoming president. So I think he can rest absolutely assured knowing that those alliances have been carved, have been strengthened, have been bolstered, and everyone in the pot gets the assignment, you know, and there's no worry on his part, because that's a sign of a leader that has assembled an appropriate team, right? Is you don't have to micromanage because you know and have faith that will take care of itself.
Sandra, you really hit the nail on the head when you talked about energy. So about 3 hours ago, we didn't get good news about inflation. It ticked right back up again. So energy is where, at our all-women town hall and where I know in a lot of different rally speeches, Trump has talked about he would attack that first, make energy cheaper for everybody, which would attack the production, manufacturing, and getting groceries into our hands and try to tackle the prices of things through that. So talk to me about Senator Thune, because if energy is going to be first out of the gate.
That promise hits the core of every business in this country, every consumer in this country. You bring down energy costs and you create a business-friendly environment for all, and that is a friendly environment for all consumers. So that was obviously a winning message in this presidential campaign. John Thune, obviously, he could be masterful with his leadership through energy reform and energy legislation. I think something you have to point out that's a lot different this time around is perhaps personalities matter less this time around with this Donald Trump presidency because he has so clearly articulated his promises to the American voters. I mean, we know his plans, right? That's what the American voters voted for in this victory. And so if John Thune's the guy, and that was what I was looking up just a minute ago because I wanted to make sure I used his exact words. He's described his relationship with Donald Trump as a working relationship. Okay. So he's not glorifying it or making it something like they're best friends or beyond. This is a working relationship. And that's what he needs right now because he's set the goals, he's made the promises. Now they have to get to work.
Yeah, the word working is key. Yeah. Everybody's got to work.
That's what
right
we pay them
now,
for.
it is a possibility with the U.S. House. And of course, we haven't called it again here on Fox. We're going with AP. Associated Press is not there yet. But if he has bicameral majority, he's not going to keep that long. We've got another election for congressional members coming up in a couple of years. So he's got to be able to do something pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.